This is the Topaz, an Australian ship. This ship left the port of Queensland in Australia in June 2020 with a cargo of 90,000 tons of coal. Its destination was the port of Jintang, where it was scheduled to discharge its coal and the journey back to Australia over several days. That, however, was not the case, because the Topaz was not permitted into the Chinese harbor after it arrived in Jintang. So, the ship sat and waited. A month has passed, 2-month period, 6-month period. After that, 10 months, the ship and her crew finally found themselves stuck at sea for over a year with no end in sight. As it turns out, this episode foreshadowed one of the most serious economic challenges that we are presently experiencing. For today's video, you will learn why Australia is in charge of the global economy. But first, accept my warmest greetings if this is your first visit to our Smart Stocks Academy channel. Hit the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell next to it to be the first to know when a new video like this is produced. If you're ready, let's get right to the video. To understand why this incident occurred, and why it is so significant, and why it is causing a worldwide economic catastrophe today, we must first understand that the present problem may have begun with a little bird just a few decades ago. A bird that sparked one of the 20th century's most serious crises. The Chinese Sparrow is pictured here, except for one thing. The Chinese authorities didn't know anything about these birds in the 1950s. They discovered that these sparrows consumed an average of 4 pounds of Chinese grain each year. On the surface, this may not appear much, especially when you consider that all of China's sparrows consume only a fraction of 1% of the grain produced there. However, the Chinese at that time considered that this little percentage was excessive. In the 1950s, China was attempting to implement communist economic policies while also being entirely self-sufficient agriculturally. To achieve their goal, they banned the privatization of all agricultural products within the country. They also decided that all food would be collected and distributed by the government. They also changed their farming techniques to match those of the Soviet Union. They also reduced crop diversity to help boost production quotas, and finally stopped trading resources with all Western nations in the hopes of becoming entirely self-sufficient. All of these regulatory changes happened very instantly, causing a major shock to China's agricultural systems. China would soon see a drop in food output as well as catastrophic national famine. But there was one item that would tip this problem over the line, and that was of course the sparrow. Remember how the Chinese authorities objected about sparrows eating a little portion of their grain? Well, as it turns out, the Chinese government decided to order the eradication of all sparrows all throughout the country in order to increase food production. As a result, billions of sparrows were murdered in China over the period of a few years, and the sparrows became practically extinct. It would not be long before China understood it had committed one of the most serious errors in history. Because of this one policy adjustment, their hunger worsened significantly. What China did not realize was the sparrows were the primary predators of all the pests in their farms. These crop-eating pests, primarily locusts, began swarming the whole nation as soon as the sparrows were gone. And unlike the sparrows, these locusts didn't devour a little percentage of the food. Swarms of locusts practically devastated entire fields or even towns of crops at a time. As a result of this incident, the famine in China became known as the Great Chinese Famine, a 5-year period during which tens of millions of people died of starvation. And keep in mind that all it needed was a few policy shifts and a hasty economic choice to trigger a huge disaster. And that brings us to the present day. Remember the Topaz? The ship that was trapped at the Sea of China the last time we saw it. Well, as it turns out, this was also due to a rash economic choice made by the Chinese government. In June of 2020, just after a few months after the pandemic began, Australia's Prime Minister, Scott Morrison, asked for a probe into the virus genesis in China. On the surface, this may not appear to be much of a story at the time, but it was the catalyst for the worldwide catastrophe that we are witnessing today. This is because China did not take the Prime Minister's criticism well. In reality, China opted to start a trade war with Australia on a few relatively insignificant remarks from the Prime Minister. On the surface, this trade war should have resulted in a clear winner, given China's economy is about 10 times that of Australia. China, on the other hand, had no idea how reliant it was on Australia. As a result, China has banned or imposed hefty tariffs on a variety of Australian exports, including barley, cattle, and half a dozen others. Coal was among the forbidden materials as it turned out. And as a result, in June 2020, when the Topaz and 60 other bulk carriers were on their way to China, they were suddenly denied entry into the Chinese ports with their coal, since China had suddenly outlawed and annulled all of its coal trading treaties. Now, coal isn't as crucial to most Western economies and infrastructures as it once was. Nations like Canada, France, the United Kingdom, and the Nordic countries, for example, produce less than 10% of their power from coal. Even the most developed Western countries, such as the United States and Germany, produced only 15 to 20% of their power from coal. Then, there is China. China generates almost 65% of its power from coal, which means that the less coal it has, the less probable it is to provide electricity for its country. China presently is the world's largest coal producer, with domestic production accounting for 75 to 90% of all coal used in the country. China, on the other hand, is reliant on coal imports from other nations to meet its industrial coal demands, such as production of metals and a substantial portion of its coal power plants. Who do you believe was at the top of China's coal import list in 2020? Well, of course, it was Australia. Prior to the coal prohibition, China imported around 78 million metric tons of coal from Australia each year, with Indonesia purchasing approximately 48 million tons. China's coal stockpiles gradually depleted from June 2020 until the present, in part owing to the suspension of imports from Australia. It is also worth mentioning that massive floods in Southern and Eastern Asia occurred at this time, causing many Chinese and Indonesian coal mines to close. There were also a few additional initiatives that reduced coal output, such as tightening safety regulations for coal industries in China. Furthermore, as a result of one quick policy move against Australia, as well as a few other environmental and policy events, we began to witness Chinese towns go black just a few months ago. Power outages continued to damage enterprises and households. Supply networks were badly affected once more, and Chinese banks that had debts with these coal businesses began to notice symptoms of loan defaults. As a result, China began to pursue new strategies, such as increasing coal output in operating mines and importing more coal from countries other than Australia. they also began requiring firms and homes to reduce their power consumption, as well as forcing their banks to make exceedingly risky loans to new coal businesses in China. However, none of these short-term remedies succeeded in the end, and China was obliged to do something that it did not want to do. Do you recall the 60 or so Australian bulk vessels stuck in China? Well, China, as it turns out, has become so thirsty for coal that it recently permitted some of the stranded ships to discharge their coal into Chinese ports. It is also worth noting that some Australian ships have been stuck at sea for more than a year. Many of these ships were diverted to nations like India and South Korea, who ended up buying a lot of the stranded coal from Australia. However, the impact of China's energy crisis, or as it should be named, China's coal scarcity, is being felt across the world right now. Many significant corporations that rely on Chinese manufacturing is experiencing delays that is equivalent to or even greater than those experienced during the start of the pandemic in 2020. In reality, a few multinational firms have begun to shift their manufacturing operations out of China and into other countries, or even locally. Mostly because businesses are learning that Chinese manufacturing is becoming increasingly unreliable. China's manufacturing industry shrunk for the second time in modern history as a result of decisions like these, as well as the closure of certain companies and electrical shortages. So where does this all lead? Well, China's economy is already suffering as a result of the coal issue, and it will continue to do so for the foreseeable future. Despite the growing energy crisis, China continues to refuse to lift the ban on Australia coal due to a few phrases made more than a year ago. According to recent remarks from a Chinese energy expert and a Chinese coal data business, the largest provinces currently only have 9 to 14 days of coal reserves. With the onset of winter in China, the country will be forced to make a difficult decision. Will it accept power shortages in the winter and a permanent closure of its economy because of few words spoken by Australia's Prime Minister? Or will it relax prohibitions on Australian coal, acknowledging that the administration took a rushed judgment that resulted in an unexpected energy crisis? Which of the two do you believe will occur? All these implies is that China has a few flaws, and the most notable of which is its high energy consumption and foolish and fast economic strategies. As it turns out, Australia, an apparently benign Western country, ended up inadvertently exposing China's flaws to the rest of the globe. It also highlighted that Australia is one of the few countries with the ability to directly impact China's economy to the point of a national calamity. And who knows what else? Perhaps as Australia and other Western nations become closer, we will see a greater gap between China and the rest of the globe. And with that, today's video comes to a close. If you haven't already, hit the like button, subscribe, and click the notification bell next to it to be the first to know when a new video is posted. Thank you very much for your time. We hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you again in the future.